Minority in Parliament vowed to no longer participate in any government business until the House is given copies of the handing over notes of the outgoing government.
These spirited attempts to have Parliament approve of loans in the injury time of President John Dramani Mahama's administration do not inure to good democratic governance.
Now, Minority Leader Sechi Mensah-Bonsu says without the document, it is difficult for Parliament to decide which business to transact and which not to. On Wednesday, efforts by Parliament to also pass the Right Information Bill into law suffered a fresh hitch after the minority threatened to walk out over the Speaker's insistence on getting the bill passed. So how does all of these affect the efficiency of Parliament? We'll be getting some responses shortly, and we'll also be crossing over to the Chamber of Parliament to see where proceedings have begun after it went on suspension for a while. And this is today's big story. My name is Aishi Bryan. At a press conference Thursday, the Minority Leader Sechi Mensah-Bonsu alleged the executive has failed to give the handing over notes to the legislature. According to him, he has checked with the Clerk of Parliament, who is the custodian of all documents in the House, and she confirms the handing over notes have not been brought to Parliament. Now, we can listen to the Minority Leader Sechi Mensah-Bonsu, who addressed the press earlier on.
As elected not to avail itself of this vehicle. In the circumstance, we in the MPP Minority Caucus would want to register, and indeed hereby register, our deepest disgust at unilateral decisions being taken to have Parliament approve of loans, suppliers credit agreements, and project implementation agreements, the latter of which process is unknown to the rules of procedure that is outstanding on this in this Parliament in this period of transition. We regret to state that we cannot be part of processes and decisions which in our considered opinion are illegitimate. It is also instructive to observe that recruitments are being made into public service. We are aware of the agreement between the government and the IMF in respect of the net freeze in employment until 2017, except in the health and education sectors. Neither the 2006 budget nor the budget for the first quarter of 2017, that is the vote on account for the first 3 months of 2017, which was submitted on behalf of the President Mahama by the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Secretary, in November 2016, made provisions for these latter-day recruitments. The question is, how is the incoming administration to cater for the remuneration of these persons now being recruited? On what criteria have these new appointments and recruitments been based? As has been stated earlier, our President-elect has stated clearly the need for national reconciliation and to avoid witch hunting. This bold statement by the President-elect should be foundationed on transparent and accountable governance, and not the events that are unfolding over the past few days. These spirited attempts to have Parliament approve of loans in the injury time of President John Dramani Mahama's administration do not inure to good democratic governance.
On Wednesday, similar complaints were made by the minority, which led to the suspension of processes to amend the Rights Information Bill. We're trying to cross over to Parliament to see what's happening in the House. The House actually suspended for a while and it has resumed. So our man Joseph Opoku-Gakpo is there. We'll be crossing over live to see what's happening in the chamber. But let's see what happened when the Right to Information Bill was tabled for amendment.
We have given ourselves a presidential transition act, and we must act in accord with that, without prejudice to what.
Honourable members, the presidential transition act, let me make this point very clear. The presidential transition act is the presidential transition act. It's not parliamentary transition act.
Oh, is that the way you want to go? If that is the way the speaker wants to go, with respect, I will tell you that then we will not want to be part of any independent act. We would not want to be part of any independent act. If it is shame that you are saying you have it in just 2 weeks. If that's the attitude, you have it in 2 weeks. What is this?
All right, so we're still trying to cross over to Parliament, but as we wait to get the live feed from Parliament, let's speak with Dr. Rashid Rahman, who is Executive Director for the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs, who joins us via phone. Good evening to you, sir. Many thanks for your time.
Good evening.
Interesting times in Ghana's Parliament, right? I'm sure you're worried about the recent happenings in Parliament, especially with the fact that the minority is threatening to no longer participate in any government business until the House is giving copies of the handing over notes of the outgoing government.
Yes, interesting times, but not surprising, because I think it's within their right to use the only tool that's available to them, which is the tool of boycott. So it's interesting, but I am not surprised. Hello?
You're still on air.
Hello, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on air and we can hear you clearly.
I was saying that I'm not surprised.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly quite interesting, but I'm not surprised about the development.
But
especially, you mentioned the issue of handing over notes.
right.
We say we are a country that is governed by law.
Right.
We heard in the media, I don't know the extent of the truth in it, but we heard over the last week or so, ministers who were supposed to have prepared their handing over notes 1 month before election were now preparing their notes,
Right.
which is a complete breach of the law. This is the law that Parliament passed, and everyone is supposed to obey that law. So the minority is right. I think they should be very much in the know of what is going on. If they had all these handing over notes in front of them and they know what's going on, then I think we'll be justified to criticize them if they refuse to participate in the business of the House.
But the situation, Doc, looks even murkier as the Speaker does not see any genuineness in the concerns raised by the minority.
Well, I don't know the basis on which, maybe the Speaker has some information that some of us don't have. But for me, I'm just using just what I heard, I mean, the discussions and the goings-on, even last week in your weekend program, the News File. I mean, I heard a lot of discussions about the fact that, you know, people simply did not obey the law. Maybe they thought that they were not going to lose power, or they simply thought that you could just disobey a law that Parliament passed and get away with it. Unfortunately, I mean, I heard that the law doesn't have any provisions for sanctions for any breach.
Right.
And if we have a law, such a law, it means that it's not a good law. I think we need to seriously take a second look. But you see, my sister, I think for me, the bigger issue here, I think as a country, perhaps we might need to take a leaf from some of the Eastern and Southern African countries. You know what they do?
Tell me, Doc.
When elections are held and the president is duly elected,
Right.
he or she gets sworn in, I think, the same day or the next day.
Right.
Because business of government must continue anyway, whether there are handing over notes or not.
Or not.
And it looks like the fact that maybe in countries where people have the opportunity and the chance to stay in office for quite some time after losing power, you end up with some of these things that we are hearing. Appointments being made, and one group is challenging, one group is saying legal. All these issues that we are seeing in Parliament, legally, fine, there's nothing wrong. But ethically, I think there's everything wrong in terms of making some of these decisions at this 11th hour of their mandate.
But Doc, handing over notes makes the smooth transition or a smooth running of the affairs of the country. And so isn't it important to make sure that there is one government handing over some notes to the next government who's coming into power to ensure that this is where the outgoing government left affairs, so we pick it from there. And so isn't it necessary to have handing over notes?
Yes, it's necessary, Aisha. So, for instance, maybe we could have a situation where we could still have the transition law. Handing over notes will be prepared 1 month before we go to election.
Right.
And then the very moment that the president is duly elected, he or she is sworn in. So that by this time, we would have had President Akufo-Addo and his administration
already taking over.
Yeah, superintending over all these things, so that nobody has the opportunity to say, I am now going to prepare my my handing over note in very kind of blatant contradiction of what the law says.
Right.
So we can still have a transitional process, but I think that we have to look at some of the provisions that will help us reduce some of the effects and all the conflicts and noise we are hearing in our country since the last week.
Doc, so in the interim, I'm sure this suggestion will be a long-term suggestion, but in the interim, how do we resolve this issue we're having in Parliament right now?
Well, I guess, again, I mean, let's look at it, let's put it in a kind of broader global perspective.
Right.
You remember when President Obama was trying to appoint the Supreme Court judges in the U.S., the Republicans told him, you are on your way out. We don't know which government is going to come, so we are going to boycott anything that has to do with that. And so they did.
All right.
And I think it's all in the right of members to use the tool that's available to them. And I believe that as a country, perhaps, maybe this is a very important time that we need to sit down and look at some of the laws that govern us, and so on. I'm sure if you flip the coin, and it's the NDC today,
right,
I don't think they will behave differently.
Right.
I don't think so. But we have to get to a point where this equalization, that when they were all, I mean, they were leaving power in 2009, they did the same thing. So there's nothing wrong. We also have to do it. We must grow as a democracy, and we must grow as a country. I mean, in the short run, I think it only would take a lot of compromise and negotiation. And I hear they are currently, I mean, negotiating. I don't know whether sitting has resumed, but it's a house, and I think maybe their leaders would have to sit down and try and see what is it that one side can give and what is it that the other side can take, so that at the end of the day, at least the business of Parliament will continue to run until this fifth Parliament is dissolved on January the 6th.
I foresee a tough one there, especially when the chairperson of the House, who is the Speaker of the Parliament, who is not compromising. He seemed not to be compromising with the issues being raised.
Did they say he's not compromising?
Well, he's trying to justify the stance of Parliament as at now. Yesterday, when the Right to Information Bill was tabled and the minority members were raising these issues, he didn't see how the transition process should affect the work of Parliament.
I mean, normally, yes, that's what you would say. This should not affect the work of Parliament. But like I said, for instance, this transition, this Freedom of Information Bill, I think we've been struggling with it for the past 12 years. And our current president, I think a year or so ago, made a comment that he's ready once, Parliament passed the law, he's going to sign it immediately. We've waited until now. I think that in some of these instances, on some of these issues, I think our leaders might have to sometimes be quick. They might have to be decisive, and they might have to be firm when dealing with these things, so that you don't leave it and push it to the last minute.
Right. Because
at this point, many people are arguing that everybody wants to take credit, and so MPP is boycotting these proceedings so that maybe when they come to power with their numbers, they can pass it and take the credit for having passed the Freedom of Information Law and so on. Whether there's any truth or any sense in that, I think it's for all of us to judge. But for me, the advice that I have for our Parliament and their leaders, current, future, and so on, is the famous parliamentary dictum, which says minorities change.
Right.
So that whatever you are doing today, the fact that you are in majority, or the fact that you have a potential majority, you must remember that someday that majority could be a minority. And would you be satisfied if that same treatment is meted out to you? So
but
I want our leaders to be guided by that dictum, that minorities change. So whatever they do, they should remember that.
I'm interested in the fact that if it was the other way, if it was NDC, they would have made the same point. So does this suggest a deliberate move by probably the minority to frustrate this outgoing government so they don't get the bill, for instance, passed, so they can do it during their tenure to take the credit?
Well, that's what a lot of social commentators are saying. I mean, I didn't go to Parliament today. I don't know what the facts are, but I know that I think all of us have been frustrated by the delays associated with passing this bill, and I think continuously we've been assured that the bill will be passed before this House is dissolved. So, I don't know honestly why the minority is dragging its feet on this bill. I think on the other issues, within their legitimate rights in terms of the loans and so on, if they say we need more information, otherwise we are boycotting. But on this Freedom of Information bill, I think we need them to sit together and make sure that this bill is passed into law.
Right. Many thanks to you. Dr. Rashid Draman is the Director for African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. And this is today's big story, been talking about the minority who has vowed to boycott government business until they are submitted with copies of handing over notes. Unfortunately, we are unable to bring you the live feed from Parliament because we are unable to get the feed. But as and when we get it, we'll bring you what's happening in Parliament currently. This is today's big story. Many thanks for watching. Good evening.